The what multifamily leaders need to know about the FCC broadband ruling event. So I'm very excited to be with you today. I have a few quick announcements. The official Best Places to Work multifamily program is open for registration. There will be, it's going to be an awesome year, exciting year, and we'll be celebrating in person at the annual Multifamily Innovation Summit in December. Super excited about that. Go to multifamilyinnovation.com and click on awards, and you can get your invite for that program. It's a very helpful program, and there's never been a better time than now to get involved. And the Multifamily Innovation Advisory Council, it's now over 1.5 million apartment units being represented. We're very proud about that, and the council this year is on track to grow to north of 3 million units by the end of the year. Now, we have a focus on being the catalyst for innovation through delivering insights to leaders all across the country. So, to learn more about how to get involved in the Multifamily Innovation Advisory Council, go to multifamilyinnovation.com. All right, so for this event, we are going to focus on the broadband ruling, the FCC broadband ruling, and we're going to help explain the changes, what they mean to you and your multifamily owners and operators, and how best you can capitalize on the changes to make it a success for both your owners and also the residents. Now, there's never been a better time in the world, and there's never been more demand for quality telecom services, and the priority, it just keeps getting higher and higher, as we know. Now, I also want to mention that you have a real estate company to run. You have a portfolio to manage. And the more and more that we're tasked with these complex things, understanding these deeply complex systems, it becomes overwhelming, right? We've got to understand these contracts, what happens in these scenarios, all these things. We want to be that resource for you. Now, what typically happens is we believe we're pretty smart around these things, right? We've been around, we understand how to do the things that we do. We've negotiated things in the past, but things are changing fastly. And what we start doing is we start watching webinars, we start doing Google research, and we start to try and take on these issues ourselves. And we get overwhelmed. So what do? What we do next is we bring in our favorite real estate attorney. The problem is what we need to do in this matter is understand telecom communications, and they're structured very differently than just your general eviction and real estate legal counsel. So we need to have this deep knowledge of telecom services and also negotiating through these programs for successful outcomes. Now, there's a lot of things happening in the news around this concept, but for multifamily leadership, we are not here to give you any legal advice, right? That's not the purpose of this. This is not for tax or any financial advice about what outcomes you can create, all those things. Our events are purely focused on creating an educational resources, extracting the knowledge from experts that can help support your program. But what we do is we recommend everyone here watching or listening to independently evaluate your own program specific to your investment strategies. And we encourage you to seek the advice from business advisors, legal professionals, whoever can help you through these matters. But do not do this stuff on your own, right? You need to seek that help, and that's why we're bringing you today some great panel experts. So we have an amazing panel that we're going to be talking about next. But before I go into the panel, let's look at some research that we asked our audience about. And what we did is, let's look at this slide here. We've got, on a scale of 1 to 10, how high quality do you think the internet and cable service is for your resident? Now, it says here a good, 60% show about an 8, 9, 10 range. So it looks positive, right? In our next slide here, we've got how important is it for quality internet cable service options for the resident? And we're seeing here strongly, right, important and very important, pretty obvious recommendation here, right? The people want choice, they want that option. And going into our next slide here, how many telecom providers or internet and cable providers do your residential properties have on average? Now, just over 18% showing more than 3 options. And 2 options is good. Look pretty strong there. And there are some sitting with only 1 option. So we also asked, how long has it been since you renegotiated your residential internet service agreements? And obviously you can see here on the slide, within the last year, actually 1 to 3 years, pretty strong. But there are some sitting out there with some negotiations soon to be ready for conversation. And how often do you think telecom providers upgrade their services to all your properties, right? How often do you think that is? And we'll talk about some of these data points and some questions that you may have as we bring on the panel experts. So with us today, I have Chris Johnston. He's a telecommunications attorney at the Johnston Law Firm. I also have joining us to talk about the business items and the negotiations and helping you through the outcomes you want to create here, Mark Weaver with cable contract negotiations. And then to shape up the owner's perspective, we have Sherry Druckman, Vice President at Stellar Holdings. That's Senior Vice President at Stellar Holdings. So let's bring the panel on. We've introduced them. Let's bring them on. Can we bring on the panel? Let's go to Chris first. Chris, being in the legal perspective of things, Chris, tell me a little bit about what you're working on, who you help, and a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a telecom attorney. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I represent primarily property owners in all different contexts, multifamily, commercial, single-family master planned, and even some stadiums and arenas. Occasionally, I will switch sides, but that's pretty rare. I do this for properties all over the country, and I do it a lot. So 10 years is probably a couple of thousand properties at this point. So I've seen all the nuances that tend to come up, and I am pretty passionate about helping owners not get taken advantage of and stay protected when they do their agreements.
Yeah, and so can you talk to us a little bit about this ruling and what it means for us today?
Sure. In February, the FCC issued an order that did 4 things. One, and this applies to multifamily. So one thing was to prohibit sale and leaseback agreements for wiring. And a sale and leaseback agreement is an arrangement where a provider conveys inside wiring, and that's the in-building wiring that runs either to the units or within the units, conveys that to the owner of the property and then leases it back on an exclusive basis. So those agreements are prohibited. That's item 1. Item 2 was the FCC prohibited what we call graduated revenue share agreements. And a graduated revenue share agreement is like the ones that are pretty common and have been for a very long time. It says that the more penetration, so the more subscribers a provider gets at a property, the greater the percentage of revenue sharing that goes back to the owner. So typically they come in the form of a table. It might show, a certain bracket of penetration, then the next higher bracket, and it assigns percentages of revenue to each bracket of penetration. So those are prohibited. And third, exclusive revenue sharing agreements are prohibited. That would be language in your agreement that says you can't collect revenue from any other provider. You can only collect revenue from us in this agreement. And lastly, there's a requirement that if there is exclusive marketing by a certain telecom provider at a property, that provider must disclose that in its marketing materials. It has to include some language in its materials saying we've got an exclusive marketing deal at this property. Now, it's important to note who is bound by these requirements. In all cases, it's not the property owner. It's the providers who must comply. But that doesn't, and we'll get to this later, that doesn't mean the property owners can be blind to what's going on. They certainly need to be in the loop and understand what's going on in order to protect themselves. So none of these apply to broadband only providers, and that includes VoIP. So if it's only internet service, then that provider is not touched by this order. The prohibition on sale and leaseback of cabling would apply to cable operators, that's MSOs, like the big ones, private cable operators, and direct broadcast satellite providers. The prohibition on graduated compensation and the prohibition on exclusive compensation are going to apply to MSOs, that's the big cable companies, ILECs, so and other LECs. So, for instance, the AT&Ts of the world, the former phone companies, but they will not apply to direct broadcast satellite providers or private cable operators. Let's see, the prohibitions in this order are effective as of April 27th, 2022, and the FCC will not apply the sale and leaseback prohibition before contracts from June 23rd, 2017. September 26th is the date for enforcement of the prohibition on graduated revenue sharing. So there is a timeline to get that issue fixed, and we'll get to that more. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell.
I want to go to Chris on this. The timing of this, September 26th. Talk to me about how important this is.
Well, the way the order is done, if there's a graduated revenue sharing deal, then it's simply that piece of the agreement becomes as if it's not there. It vanishes. So the provider is not going to have to pay if there's graduated revenue share deal. You've been collecting your checks for a while. If it does not get changed to a flat revenue share, if it doesn't get amended, if the deal doesn't get amended to replace that graduated revenue share with a flat revenue share, then that will mean that the provider no longer has an obligation to pay. So it's good to be getting amendments done at this point. Some of the providers are proactively reaching out because they want, in many cases, they want to continue to compensate owners. They do those deals for a reason, and they want to continue paying and rewarding owners for marketing. So yeah, they're proactively reaching out. Some are proposing a new revenue share flat rate that approximates what's been going on at the property already. But yeah, the significance of the deadline is if it elapses, then you lose your revenue share stream if you have not replaced this existing graduated revenue share with a flat one.
And Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
You mean Mark?
Sorry, Chris. I mean Mark. Sorry, I'm looking right at Chris.
No problem. What's interesting with that is it's going to be very interesting to see how it all intertwines. I was part of a event about a month ago where a couple of the big telecom providers were discussing that they thought they could simply have a meeting of the minds by sending an acknowledgement, just a signature from a decision maker about how they were going to change things. One of the big things that really came out of that meeting, which had multiple attorneys, multiple providers, just a lot of people involved, was that nobody really knows yet. Talking about the wiring, talking about the exclusive marketing concerns, which are pretty significant, talking about the revenue share. all of them kind of looked at each other and said, well, we think it's going to be this. Well, we think it's going to be this. I guess we'll figure it out in court. So it's going to be very interesting to see where it finally lands. Chris, one of the things Chris mentioned was that the providers do not have to continue providing revenue share information. They don't have to continue to pay revenue share. Exactly correct. So if you have any of these agreements hanging out there, what does that do? If it's a significant enough number that you want to make sure that you have that ongoing revenue, you should probably reach out and make sure what's going on. What's interesting that I noticed with a lot of the survey results is that there is such a gulf between what everyone thinks where their stuff is at, where their agreements are at, how many providers they have. It's really interesting to see that more often than not, in my experience, we end up having probably 30% of the owners and operators that really do have a clear handle on what's going on with their properties. More often than not, they don't. And so one of the things that we really like to tell our clients is be aware of the things that are coming down the pike so that you can offset and create a fire break, a protection, before they start coming out and affecting your bottom line.
What are some of those things like that we're finding here?
One of the biggest ones that concerns me, and it's really interesting that, again, this event that I went to, nobody seemed to recognize or believe that it was significant, was the exclusive marketing function. If you have exclusive marketing with any of these providers, they are obligated by the FCC ruling to make contact with your residents to tell them that they have an exclusive marketing agreement. Well, I remember back a decade ago here in the Seattle market where residents, potential prospective tenants, would go to a property and say, if you don't have a certain provider, I'm not going to rent from you because they're the only ones that have good internet speed. They're the only ones that have the service that we like. And it created a really amazing impact in the market here when we had a lot of high-tech tenants, and it created this atmosphere that was extremely toxic for providers that were not keeping up with the potential. What that results in, and what I'm fully expecting to see happen, is come July, August, September, when the providers start sending out letters to the residents where they have exclusive marketing agreements, I expect the residents, maybe 10% of them, to look and say, hold it a second, I can get service from another provider if I go talk to my on-site management and call the provider and ask them to set it up. Most of the on-site management has no understanding of what's going on. Most of the tenants have no idea about the technological background that would prevent new providers from coming on site. I don't see how that does not create significant conflict and friction within the on-site management team and the residents. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out.
I want to go to Sherry because Sherry, you own your portfolio. This impacts the way you see customer experience. How do you see all of this right now?
Well, that's right, Patrick, and Mark really summed it up really well. From an ownership perspective, we're always looking for ways on how we can maximize our revenue and our NOI. And particularly this year, we set out with a really strong, aggressive strategy on really recovering our NOI to pre-COVID levels. So we took a really deep dive on how we can achieve that. One of the first things that you do is you look at all of your contracts, right? You see where can you maximize? How can we achieve better results with better savings and be very competitive? The cable contract is one of the largest components of your contracts that it can have really great potential income for you. So what we found was our contracts that had been initiated a decade previously had then lapsed, and we were operating with multiple providers. We have 3 providers at our community, and we realized that we were just without a signed contract. And so that's when we really engaged with Mark to explore how can we negotiate to get the revenue share that we need. But then that coupled with the new FCC rulings, it became really complicated on making sure that we were in compliance and being able to achieve the greatest return, but primarily continue offering great service and great options to our residents. That's always number one.
Yeah. So talk to me, Mark. How do these negotiations happen? You can't get into the details here on this event, but what is available to people today, I guess?
Well, one of the things that is really interesting is that, for instance, Sherry's building, there was one provider there in particular that had not upgraded their equipment in over 5 years. And they were very specific. They were not going to upgrade until they had an upgraded agreement, because they have to have something that says in place what rights they have to be there. Why would you invest money in upgraded equipment if you don't know if you're going to stay, right? If the owner's going to tell you to leave, you're not going to, as an operator, put the money in. So in this case, we were able to take all three of the providers, talk with all of them, get door fees from each of them. So essentially they said, yes, we're going to pay so many dollars per door for the rights to be there, and then pay an ongoing revenue share, and we're going to upgrade all of our equipment. Now, when you do that with a non-exclusive marketing agreement, what that does is it takes us out of all the FCC problems. We have no concerns with any of that stuff, and we have pretty good income. We can't really real numbers at this point, but I'm pretty pleased with the numbers that we got for sharing our team for the per doors fees. And then we're going to have ongoing revenue shares. Mm-hmm. And we have competition, which means one of the things that we like to say, if you'll give me a second here, basically the competition drives upgrades. So if you have no competition in a building, you've got one provider, maybe two providers, and you have no real competition in there, why would they upgrade anything? There's literally no financial incentive to do so. One of our properties is a large condo where they don't have an exclusive marketing agreement, but technically they're the only one in the building. The service has been going down for the last 15 years, and there is zero incentive for the provider to upgrade the service. And now all the tenants are extremely unhappy, and they can't seem to figure out why no one will come and upgrade. So it's that standard thing of saying, how do we upgrade? How do we make sure we have ongoing revenue from it? And when we do that correctly, we have happy tenants, all of which is a win-win. That's the point, right?
Exactly. And just to add, our expertise is in operating, running the proper rent levels, customer service. For us to negotiate directly with these cable providers, there's no way that we would be able to do that and even understand the language, and make sure that we were getting the right agreements and also staying within compliance.
Yeah, one interesting aspect of that is one of the providers was originally offering Sherry's building 20% of what we were able to achieve for. Mm-hmm. So it is amazing how the providers typically intentionally, they're trying to save money too, right? Mm-hmm. It is amazing how many times there is no compensation offered to the owners, because if the owners don't know to ask and don't know where to push at things, they will never get the right numbers. They will never get anything. And it's a win for the providers to say, hey, we got access to everything and we didn't have to give them anything for it. Hey, that's a win for them financially, right? So I used to work for one of the big providers, and I was responsible for a relatively large area for them. And as a person who actually owns real estate, I've got a lot of family background managing family properties. It was really frustrating for me to look and say, there's not a fair game here, right? There's not real clear information for both sides to know what's going on, to have a fair transaction and a fair meeting of the minds. So when I left there, that was really the big driver for us, is to help people like Sherry, like some of these properties that are saying, look, we don't really know that space, and it doesn't incentivize. There's no financial incentive for us to hire somebody on staff that knows how to do this. There's not enough business for us to have that. But can we hire a good third party that knows that space? Absolutely.
Yeah, and what do you say though to the operation that has a team that they may have a legal team and great asset management. They're great negotiators. I mean, they do deals all day long, acquisitions, things like that. They feel confident in that. What would be missing here, I guess, if you don't have the right team?
That's exactly the right question. One of our clients is one of the top 20 provider owners in the country, and we were doing some deals for them. They finally came to us because they couldn't get more out of some of the providers, and they couldn't understand why. Well, the difference was that when they're offering the provider 500 doors or 1,000 doors a year, that's very different than offering the provider 15,000 doors, 20,000 doors, 25,000 doors a year, which is where we're at because we have so many different clients. We're only focused on one thing when it comes to the telecom space, right? So when we come in and talk to the providers, they don't even try to argue with us. They don't even try to buffalo us. They know that we know their game. And so it is much more reasonable for them to say, okay, you know what we've offered before, you know where we're at. These are the terms. Do you want it or not? And we can say yes and just move on. There's not a lot of back and forth that is the normal negotiation because we're both on the same level. We're peers. They know that we know the game.
It's such a unique expertise, and it's a field that our operators, our on-site operators, that are just not versed in, and that's why you really need expert consulting, like Mark really helped us with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if I go to Chris, if we can pull you back into this, and just what's the difference really between that real estate attorney and somebody like yourself that's been so deeply connected to the technicalities of these programs? I mean, what are your thoughts about what we're talking about here?
First off, there's a basic knowledge of the technology that you need to have in order to read these agreements and understand what's going on. So if somebody's not at least basically versed in that, it could create a problem. There are also conventions in the industry for what is reasonable to ask for in a contract. And it's by doing these day in and day out that you learn what those conventions are. You learn what you can ask for and be confident in that ask. So often, if somebody is brand new to this field and is providing input on an agreement, there will be a bunch of requests, there will be a bunch of revisions, and you look at them and you can just instantaneously say yes, no, what'll fly, what won't fly. And things tend to take a long time sometimes when you send them over to especially bigger providers. So you don't want to be taking a bunch of extra turns with the contract by asking for a bunch of stuff that nobody asks for. And you especially don't want to miss the protections that you learn to spot after years and years. So if you're coming fresh to this field, you're going to miss a lot of protections that should be built into any contract that may even be just gimmies that the providers would be fine allowing. And if you miss those, you could really jeopardize how service goes at a property. And if you jeopardize how service goes at a property, it can end up really damaging a property. I mean, if you can't hold the provider accountable, it can end up with residents on social media bashing your property. So you want to do what you can to avoid things like that. Oh, and then the FCC stuff. Someone's got to be versed in the FCC stuff.
Yeah, there's that. And I'll just add, and we really equip ourselves with the knowledge and make sure that we're up to date on the new laws, and even with all of the great information out there that's put out by the National Apartment Association, all of the FCC information, it's still very much an expert field. And having the confidence of having a consultant with backing up with the attorney feedback is really got us to where we are now with these signed contracts and on our way to achieving our NOI goals for the year.
If I can give one kind of shout out to on a deal that Chris and I worked on, man, it was a while ago. The owner had multiple buildings in one of the western states over hundreds of miles apart from each other, and wanted to have his attorney look at the paperwork. And in that conversation, we were very clear. It's like, look, if he doesn't understand telecom law, then there's a really good chance that they're going to recommend you do something that's going to get you in trouble. And time passed, and they just went ahead and talked to their attorney. The email that he forwarded me from the attorney essentially told the owner to do an exclusive access agreement with all of them with one provider and forget about it. Well, the problem with that is exclusive access agreements were outlawed in 2007 from the FCC. That's a big problem. And so it was really interesting with this interchange back and forth, because the owner didn't really understand the depth of the need to make sure you really did understand the FCC law, until I responded and said, if you're touching that, I'm not in, because I don't want to be involved in the ongoing lawsuits. And it really caught their attention. And then shortly thereafter, they called Chris. Right?
True.
So Sherry, tell me a little bit about what got you thinking? I mean, obviously you're well involved in the National Apartment Association. You're already tracking some of these forward-thinking trends and obviously more aware of things, and contributing to many things, supporting the advancement of, I think, our industry's impact. What made you, I guess, motivated to make this a priority? I think that's really what we need to get. There's a lot of things that our industry is trying to pay attention to solving right now, from talent shortages to construction. I mean, all kinds of business items. What made this a priority for you?
I think it was really a combination and the timing of not only our strong NOI strategy that we needed to put together to achieve our pre-COVID goals, but that coupled with really all of the new FCC rulings, and to take a look at how can we maximize our contracts, how can we set ourselves apart from our competition, and how can we do all of this by staying in compliance. And so it was really a combination of all of those things. I think there's so much new product right now, so much on amenity wars and who has the best offerings. We want to make things easy for our residents, and one of the ways in doing that is giving them options. And so the timing was very serendipitous with Mark approaching us as well, and his expertise to say, hey, are you aware your contracts that you were signed over a decade ago are no longer active? Let's partner up here. And frankly, at first, we had a real aversion to signing. And we really had to work very closely with Mark and Chris on the double verification background of making sure we're in compliance, because we really didn't even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because it just seemed so complicated. And so I think really partnering up and educating ourselves, empowering ourselves to be educated by the experts, by consultants, by legal, really got us through the finish line of a great signed deals that we know now we're protected. We still can offer all of these multiple options to our residents, and that really sets us apart. And again, it really helps us as owners to get closer to our NOI goals.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's we do acquisitions, we do teams when we buy these $80-100 million assets. We do recognize that. And I think it's interesting to start looking at the infrastructure in these cities we build, right? These little apartment cities, and make sure you do have the right team there. I have a couple of questions, maybe if it's Mark or Chris, if you want to take this. And it's on infrastructure. So if the infrastructure is installed by one provider and the others don't have the necessary infrastructure, is providing bulk services with that one provider illegal?
No, it's not illegal.
No.
No, the order doesn't touch bulk services. The FCC had said they were going to look at it, but they decided to leave bulk services alone. And the order also does not prohibit exclusive use of wiring. It prohibits sale and lease back. So one provider can be there and can still get exclusive use of wiring.
What's interesting with that is the infrastructure question is really one of the key details you have to look at with every property, right? I was actually out at Sherry's property last week and found another set of wiring that was actually higher quality than what one of the providers was using. It was already in place. It was like, man, this is perfect. Yay. It was really, really good. But one thing that keeps coming out of the conversations of infrastructure and providers using it comes back to the conversation of bulk and then the conversation of managed Wi-Fi, right? And my team has a, I guess, contradictory opinion of a lot of the managed Wi-Fi conversations that are going on right now, where the idea is to say we're offering service, internet service to all the residents as part of their being a tenant. Well, that is essentially a bulk service, right? That's the point of it. Anytime you have a bulk service, what you're doing by financial restrictions is preventing other providers from really investing into the building. So as long as you are willing to say, great, we're going to bet all of our prestige on one provider that's going to provide perfect bulk services and perfect managed Wi-Fi, we're going to trust them, then, okay, that's a bet if you want to take it. I don't know about anyone else here, but I never have been comfortable with my cable service a year after I bought it. There's always a problem, right? If there's no financial incentive for them to maintain the service, everyone loves it at the honeymoon time, but things get more difficult later. And so I'm really hesitant and relatively negative for most properties when we talk about managed Wi-Fi, because even though there is a per unit, though a way to make more money per unit, I think the risk that a lot of the owners are looking at long-term in the quality of their building, the infrastructure they're building, the options for the future, I think there's a pretty significant downside that is not really being accounted for. So, Chris, you and I have talked a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. There are some areas where bulk is normal. Student housing, bulk is normal. It's unusual to have a non-bulk property in student housing. Conventional housing, bulk is not the norm. It is getting some traction, but still you're going to have many more properties in conventional housing with non-bulk service, and ideally with multiple providers like everyone's been talking about. Because I can say in my years of doing this, every property I've seen where there's a true disaster on service is a one provider property in some way or another. So yes, bulk service it's kind of staking the fate of your property with one provider, but it does happen sometimes. But that said, yeah, in conventional housing, it's much more common not to do it. Oh, and owners need to be aware that once you do a bulk deal, like Mark was saying, there's the practical problem. Nobody else makes money if they show up at a property where there's bulk services, no other providers. But typically there's a contractual ban on you having bulk services if a provider is going to show up and offer those services. So say, for instance, that a big cable provider is going to provide video, internet, and phone service. That cable provider is going to have language in its contract that says you can't have bulk service on any of this with somebody else, because that wrecks our money for the property. So owners need to know, if you go bulk with one provider, don't expect anyone else to show up with that service, because it would take sometimes a miracle to get that approval to remove that language.
And if you've had service from 2 or 3 different providers in the past, and you've had the property for 5 or 10 years, oftentimes the owners don't realize that there are agreements in place, whether they realize they're there or not. Right. There are absolutely agreements in place that put restrictions on what can be done in that property from telecom and cable providers. And so thinking that, no, we don't have any restrictions just because you don't know about it, does not mean you should take the risk and sign up with someone for bulk without actually grabbing the old paperwork, getting them from the providers directly, and making sure of what is really in there, and renegotiating them if you have to for that purpose, right? There's yeah.
Yes, I agree completely.
Well, and one of the compelling points that Mark was educating us on throughout this process was, we really need to be in a contract, because that forces the providers to keep the equipment maintained, to handle it if there's any kind of an issue or damage or interruption in service. It really holds them accountable as much as it protects us as well.
Yeah. One other thing that we referred to when Chris said, student housing is one, conventional housing. Let's remember the senior housing, right? Yeah. One thing that I am honestly very concerned about, I've got some senior housing operators that I need to follow up with. We've been so busy, I just haven't followed up with them. So that's on our task for this week after this. But really, most senior housing operators have got bulk service. Most of the bulk service agreements that I've seen have included in them an exclusive marketing component. So the question is now, all of these properties that have got bulk service, if they have exclusive marketing in there, Chris, I'll ask you, I don't think there's anything that would mean that because they have bulk service, that the provider is still not required to turn around and notify all of the residents that they have an exclusive marketing agreement. Would that be fair?
I agree with that read of the order. When they're providing their marketing materials, they would need to include the required disclosure.
So, but I thought there was something part of that also where they would still have to, for existing residents, they still would have to send some type of notification to them.
Yes. So residents do need to be made aware. So providers must include a statement in their written marketing material directed at renters or prospective renters, making clear that there is an exclusive marketing right, and it needs to be very legible for anybody. So the implication there is you need to let residents know. So it's, there's marketing being done. This should be included in that marketing. The message does need to get to residents.
What scares me, and this really only occurred to me in the last week or two, is all of the senior housing residents. I don't want my 85-year-old grandma to get a note that her rights are restricted because the operator of the building she's in only has an agreement with one provider, right? I can see that being a heartburn issue arriving to certain residents that are already fixated on looking for something to occupy their time, right?
Right.
It is going to be extremely interesting, in my opinion, to see what the social fallout is among tenants over the next 6 months.
It'll be interesting to watch. I know Sherry will have her finger on the pulse on that. Mark, let me go to you on this question. Is there an outcome difference when you deal with one property? I mean, obviously bulk negotiations bring in more strength, more scale to the table, the obvious incentive there. But are there any incentives to the outcomes to either deal points, door fees, things like that when you look at the whole portfolio instead of just maybe one property?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the things that I was also kind of watching with the survey results. When the survey results said, yes, we've renegotiated our agreements in the last 1 to 3 years, that may be fine for properties that are, or for owners that have only got 1 or 2 properties, right? But I fully expect that owners that have got 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 80, 100 properties, they only have so many properties that fell in that renegotiation window. Because if you've got a 10-year agreement with, I'll pick one provider, won't name them, but one of the providers, they'll do a 10-year agreement, and then the last 2 years of that agreement are when they can renegotiate. They normally will not renegotiate any of the terms until you're in the last 2 years. So I am relatively convinced that a number of the things we saw in the survey results are going to be owners that have got a lot of properties that are in the window that really those haven't been renegotiated recently, right? And all of those that have exclusive are going to have the same, or revenue share, graduated revenue share, are going to have the same results. They're still subject to the FCC ruling. What we do is we really look at an owner and we say, let's look at all of your properties at the same time. Because the more we can pull in as a portfolio, what that does is it releases the controls that each individual frontline salesperson, I guess would be the best way to say it, that you interact with each of the providers. They've got certain restrictions of what they can do with deal points. The way to get around those is to say, I'm bringing more properties. I'm bringing these other ones. When you do that, now all of a sudden, they have the ability to go to the management and say, okay, we need to open up our guidelines and try to get more because they're bringing us more value. So it always makes sense to take all of your properties, fit everything you possibly can in, because every additional door creates significantly more leverage for the decision makers on the other side of the table.
And can also affect your revenue share percentage as well.
Door fees, revenue share, and honestly, the ability to update their buildings. So we've got one developer that we worked with. We negotiated the deals about probably 18 months ago for a developer in Seattle that had 4 different buildings they were putting up at the same time. One of the main providers that provides high-speed fiber would only do deals on these properties they would only do fiber for properties that had doors over 250 doors. Anything under that, they wouldn't put their best technology in. Well, we combined all these together. 2 of the 4 were less than the 250 doors. And we leveraged that really hard to make sure now we've got a low-income housing property that has 80 doors that is going to have the fastest fiber that they would never have been able to get for their residents without us doing it the way we did. And
that's so awesome.
Yeah, we're really passionate about making sure that everyone has access to everything they could possibly need. We like redundancy. Things are going to break. When they break, you have to have options. And so having that, leveraging them all together and making sure that everything actually had similar technology. Now you've got one property manager that understands what's going on in 4 different buildings. They understand the technology there and they can maintain it. It's huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, I really like what you were saying there on the redundancy, the options. Even when you said earlier, Mark, on the competitiveness, having, inspiring and getting alignment with further ongoing investment. That's a great alignment to have. And of course, now you're aligning with the owners and management companies that are trying to provide the best service for the residents. Sherry, before we're coming up on the end of our time here, but Sherry, I'd love to wrap with, who is, in your perspective, I mean, you guys are owners, so this is important to the bottom line. and also the resident experience you're creating. But you know, management companies, who's having this conversation? Who's leading it? Is it management companies taking it to owners? Are owners asking to look for other ways? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's both. I think that it really depends on the community and the structure. But in this circumstance, it was really both jointly coming from an owner perspective and then working hand in hand with our management company to explore the history. You know, all of the service. How have those providers been in the past? What's the history? And do we want to continue moving forward with a partnership? And then bringing in Mark, our consultant, bringing in Chris, the legal background. It's really, in my opinion, a 4 or 5 prong approach to getting the best results.
Yeah, that's really great. Any other final thoughts for you know, Chris or even Mark?
Everyone
Go
needs
ahead,
to
Chris. You can go first. You got in first, Chris.
Sure. I would just say, don't take your telecom agreements for granted. If it's an overarching theme of this whole discussion, there are a lot of things in there that you need to be aware of, that you can mess up, and that you can't, both from a legal side and from the business side. So it's important to know what you've got, what's binding your property, and also what you can do about it to protect yourself or secure an advantage going forward. It's just not something to ignore.
Excellent. I would say that a lot of the focus of what we've done with Sherry so far and with a lot of our clients has been raising the income that comes in, right? There's a whole nother component of lowering the expenses, which is pretty significant in really making sure that you maximize your NOI. And although, you know, we help with a lot of those kind of functions in other spaces, in the telecom space, what that comes down to is making sure that you're not having to spend money on replacing the wiring. You're not purchasing wiring to install. You're maintaining things. How are you maintaining those? There's ways with the telecom agreements to ensure that the telecom providers, the cable providers, are paying for that and are doing the labor on that instead of the building owner and operator. And so as you start looking at infrastructure within the property, there's ways to look at it and say, okay, how do we maximize the money coming in, but also shrink our expenses so it's not going to be more damaging when we're even having this conversation? A lot of people that I talk with are more scared about the expenses that are going to have to come up without even recognizing that those expenses are going to be there anyway if your wiring is degrading. So let's figure out how to minimize so that doesn't actually hit your bottom line.
Yeah, very refreshing. I really appreciate you guys showing up. Sherry, Chris, Mark, awesome for you guys just showing your expertise and your perspective from your vantage point on how this can help create value and be a positive thing if handled correctly. So appreciate you guys for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So listen, it's been awesome to join us today. I know that you guys got a lot of things to do and a lot of different places you could be. Just a reminder that the official Best Places to Work multifamily program is open for registration. We'll be celebrating that at the annual Multifamily Innovation Summit in December in person. So go to multifamilyinnovation.com, click on awards to get your invite. And don't forget, if you want to get involved in the Multifamily Innovation Advisory Council, go to multifamilyinnovation.com. You're going to be part of some of the things that we're doing, even on a broadcast like this. We're having private conversations with multifamily owners and operators. Just surpassed 1.5 million units. We'll be at 3 million by the end of the year. And we're making some big things happen in multifamily. So with that, we'll see you guys in the next show. We'll see you.